Hello and welcome to this new episode of Bootstrapping Your Dream Show. I'm your host Manuj Aggarwal, and today we'll be talking with a very special guest, Gabriela Cuevas Barron. Gabriela is currently a member of the Committee of Foreign Affairs and the Committee on Urban and Metropolitan Development in the Mexican Parliament. She's also the honorary president of the Inter-Parliamentary Union for Mexico. Gabriela was elected the president of the Inter-Parliamentary Union with 80% of the votes, being the second woman, the youngest person, and the first Mexican to take over this role. Gabriela is also the co-chair of the steering committee of the UHC 2030, which is a multi-stakeholder international health partnership comprising governments from 66 countries, as well as multilateral organizations, civil society organizations, and private sector entities. Gabriela was also the senator and chaired the Foreign Affairs Committee in the Mexican Parliament and achieved two important reforms during her tenure. The first one involved the reform of the Mexican Constitution's Article 11 relating to asylum and recognition of condition as a refugee. This reform was approved by unanimously and now benefits over 25,000 refugees every year. The second reform concerned the law governing Mexico's foreign service so that Mexican consulates could issue birth certificates, helping thousands of migrants in any procedure involving public and private entities. Gabriela was also the mayor of Mexico City and was the only woman at the time to have this position. Being a mayor of a major metropolis means that she was in charge of over 5,000 employees and 500,000 inhabitants. Gabriela received an Innovation in Transparency Award from the local transparency authorities in Mexico City. As a constituent member of the parliament, Gabriela presented and achieved the approval of an initiative to ensure the upholding of human rights of foreign persons who have been granted asylum or refugee status by Mexico. Gabriela is also an active volunteer. She co-founded Fundación EDUCA México, which currently benefits around 17,000 young students in Mexico. She co-chairs Task Force on Humanitarian Relief, Social Protection for lancet COVID-19 Commission. Thank you so much, Gabriela, for making the time. I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you for this very kind invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you and to have this conversation.
Awesome. So you have achieved tremendous success, and from what I know, you have been in public service since you were very, very young. So before we get into anything, can you help us get to know you better? Maybe walk us down the memory lane. How did you get started, and what has been your journey like?
Well, it has been a very strange journey, actually, because I don't know in the rest of the countries, but at least in Mexico, my own country, usually you don't get in politics very young. Politics is kind of an adult thing, no? And the same happens in terms of like the family business. In many families, you go on with the tradition. If your father or mother, they are a doctor or a teacher or a fireman, you kind of do the same. And it was not my story. I was the first person in my family to join politics. I started very young, at 15 years old. And at that moment, and that's kind of fun because I still think the same. I believe that when you can make a change in your community, you have to do that. I mean, if you are able to have education and access to health and different services and food and housing, well, that's a privilege. And that's something that, honestly, we didn't do anything to have that. That was perhaps into our parents' issues or perhaps the family history. But we were born with some privileges. And now we have a commitment also to give that back. We need to build more equal societies. We need to give these opportunities of housing, food security, access to health to every person in the world. We cannot continue having this highly unequal planet. So that was the reason 27 years ago, and it still is. I'm going to take a pause in politics, actually. I am still a member of my parliament in Mexico, which is the Congress. So I'm going to take a pause, but of course I am not closing that door. It's only like taking fresh air after 27 years,
Yeah.
work more with civil society, with entrepreneurs, and then perhaps coming back to politics again.
That's amazing. Very admirable. Now, being young at 15, most people are, most people are into parties and, just sort of enjoying life, right? And politics needs a little bit of a thought about others, as you mentioned, thinking about how we can make an equal society, how we can give these privileges to those who don't have it. So was there a particular incident, anything that sort of prompted that notion of public service in you, or you were just naturally inclined to it?
I think that we all have a dream, and we have something in our souls that are telling us what to do at every moment in our lives. But I grew up in a family with very important concerns in terms of equality, in terms of fighting poverty. My grandmother was always bringing us to teach young kids about how to read and write and some math. Of course, my school was also kind of committed. It was a religious school, so they were very pushy in terms that with solidarity and those values should be always present in our decisions. So I think that even that I didn't grow up in a family where politics were even part of the conversation. They really don't care about politics. It's something that I believe it's a concern about the kind of community or the kind of societies that we are living in. So I think that it was like having like some kind of messages from the universe, education, family, and then everything was like fixed, like in a puzzle. And well, when I was 15 years old, this school, which again, it was a religious school, they were like super pushy for things related to the kind of exercise or being active in a Catholic school. But I am not a very religious person. Well, not at all. And what I asked to the nuns was to start doing something like directly with the community. I think that if we have faith and we have hope and we want all these religious values, which I think those are universal values, the best way to translate that is to do that with persons, to make this world a better one. So it was kind of a concern with my grades. And then I started working with some communities here in Mexico. I was super young, but we have a lot of corruption here. And when I started working at these very poor communities and trying to help people and to improve services and the quality of life, well, then the authorities didn't react very well because some of them don't want to have educated people or well-informed or different perspectives. So it was a moment where politics started, or politicians started to be an impediment to go ahead and to improve the quality of life of the community. And it was a very poor community. So I couldn't understand why politicians were doing that. So I spoke with my father and I told him, well, politicians are really terrible. We need to make a change for that. And he was, I don't know, like super rational for a kid, 14, 15 years old. And he told me, okay, what are you going to do about that? I'm going to become a politician and I am going to change that. Then I've been working to change politics and politicians, sometimes in Mexico, sometimes around the world.
That's great. That's awesome. That's a great story. So it seems like the moral of the story is they listen to the faint voices that are coming to you and then follow your path without hesitance.
Yeah, we need to follow our hearts, especially if the heart is having good intentions and feeling.
Yeah, of course. Now, once you made up your mind, you have done so many things which have not been done before, becoming the mayor of Mexico City and so on and so forth. How did you overcome those challenges? I'm sure it was not easy for you to even sort of, run the races, being a mayor, or, do these things which have never been done before. So how did you overcome them? How did you find the courage to do all these things?
I believe that, yes, it is a matter of courage, but also a matter of strategy, of discipline, and thinking that if we see the goal that we want to follow, sometimes it can be seen like something huge, almost impossible. But I think that if we make a plan and we do our best to be rational and to leave perhaps all those doubts and negative feelings, or perhaps those terrible opinions that sometimes are not having the best intentions, I think that having that sense of purpose plus a plan and discipline, it's a wonderful mix. And what I have found that I think something just amazing is to have a good team. Having people willing to support you, to encourage you, perhaps even when we are trying. I am now in a moment of a very important transition. After 27 years of being a politician, now I am starting as an entrepreneur and also dealing with international politics and a lot of stuff. So it's wonderful to have people around you helping in terms of building the strategy, in terms of giving good advice, sharing what they have done also in their lives. We all have something wonderful to share, but sometimes we are not open enough to share that or to hear that. So I think that having a good network, a good team, can make a huge difference in those moments where doubts or negative feelings are appearing. But I think that, yes, it's courage, it's about strategy, it's about taking one day by the time. I think that if you have told me like 20 years ago, you're going to be presiding all the parliamentarians of the world, I was going to say, yeah, of course. But I think it's about having these commitments and a strong desire to make a change. And that's something that we can learn from millennials, for example, this strong collaborative strategy. And that's the way to make changes. That's the way to do something with your life, with your community.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I completely agree. You know, having a strategy and team, as you said, having a strong team is critical, because nobody can do everything on their own. Now, moving on to, once you get into politics, I mean, sometimes I have a tough time deciding between my family what to eat for dinner. But to make decisions, big decisions, you have to get so many different perspectives. How do you achieve consensus in these big decisions where people have very strong opinions and their own agendas and whatnot?
That's a wonderful question. I think that there are two kind of experiences, and they are very different. One was perhaps at the beginning of my life, like being a parliamentarian or starting my own career, when I was not able to be, for example, chairing a committee or chairing the Inter-Parliamentary Union. But it's very different when you're a member than when you are chairing. When you're a member, I think that the most complicated part is to have enough time and passion and energy to go with everyone, every single person, and to explain to them why you want to make something, why you are proposing a bill, why you want to change a budget, why you want to preside the Inter-Parliamentary Union. It's a matter of loving, but I don't like the way as we see loving, because we are associating loving also with, I think, some horrible companies. But that's not the purpose of having this approach and conversations and dialogue with your peers. And I think that the important part there is, and I think that's something that we are not giving enough value, which is empathy. If we are able to listen, if we are able to feel as the other person is feeling, then we can have a stronger consensus, and we can have a stronger understanding and a more I think long-lasting agreement. I think that's very important. Empathy in politics. We're human beings. We need to be everywhere.
Exactly.
And the other side is when I have been chairing meetings, and I have a very particular style. I must say, I can be kind of exhausting for a lot of people. Usually, rules for every debate are like one person in favor, one against. That's it. But if you have an auditorium with 180 countries represented there, with parliamentarians from different ideologies, political parties, gender, age, etc., it's not enough to have one person in favor and one against. So I dedicated a lot of time to give the floor to a lot of people and to hear as much as I could. And then after hearing all different perspectives and proposals and ideas and sometimes complaints, of course, then I think that I was able to find a solution that could perhaps reach a consensus in the most inclusive way.
I see.
But it's not about this kind of impositions, or the person, when someone is chairing a meeting, they are already coming with something that they want to have as an outcome. And there's a process. And the political process means that you need to hear, you need to listen, you need to have dialogue, you need to understand and to make an effort to see other people's concerns and to try to find a solution. I think those are different responsibilities, but perhaps the summary of all this is to have empathy and to be able to listen, and then you can reach a consensus. But if you're not listening, you're not going to know or to understand or to feel what other persons are putting in the table.
Absolutely. No, I could not agree more. So, but the question arises: do you feel that there's a lot of empathy around in business or politics these days?
No, we need to build that, definitely. If empathy was a value right now, I'm sure that the pandemic was not going to be this long. I mean, there are people not willing to use a face mask. That's a lack of responsibility, but also a lack of empathy, because it's not only about if I can get sick or not. It's about the other persons, and perhaps they have older parents, or they have a person with some kind of diseases in their family or their house or community. So it's about empathy and about understanding that we live in a public space, in a community. I think that perhaps the new generations are recovering the value of empathy in a very strange way. Because it's not the same to have empathy through social media or through a Zoom or something, that to have empathy in a 3D way, in a person-to-person approach. I think that changes a lot, because feeling someone through a screen or through a smartphone, it's more difficult. But that's the way the world has been for the last year and a half. I believe that at the end, what we can learn from this pandemic is the value of a hug, the value of shaking hands, the value of being able to have a real conversation, a person-to-person conversation. I hope that we learn that lesson, and perhaps then empathy becomes important again.
No, that's a very good point. I feel like it is shifting a little bit. The more people I talk to, they talk about these kind of things, which was never part of the conversation before the pandemic. So I hope things are changing for the better. Now, let me ask you another question. Is that so? You have been in politics at the local level, at the national level, and now at the international level. So, what are the similarities and differences you see in at that level? Is it the same mechanism? Is it the same strategy, or is it very different approach you use at these levels?
It's totally different, but there are some coincidences. And I think that from the local politics and all the way, like regional, national, international politics, it's about placing people at the center of all decisions. If we are not aware enough that what we do it's about people, then as a politician, you're lost. Because it's not about companies, it's not about profits, it's not about a lot of possible concerns. It's about people that are trusting in you, that are putting all their confidence that you're going to represent their voices in a very good way, that you're going to bring their concerns to the different arenas, local, national, international. So I think that's like a common ground. And that should be like the mantra for a politician. You are there for the people, not by the people. So that's the first part. But then in terms of public policy, in terms of work, in terms of like daily business, I think that it's not like the common ground, but there's a bridge.
Okay.
From the international politics, we are reaching very important agreements. We are able to put all different kind of countries together for a common cause.
Yeah.
But even if we reach the best treaty or the best agreement at the United Nations, if those treaties or agreements are not ratified and implemented at the national level, and they are not replicated at the local level, nothing is going to change. For example, SDGs. When we talk about the Sustainable Development Goals, all countries are on board. All of them. No one is criticizing SDGs. And why the world is not changing? Because we don't need to ratify SDGs, but we have that common ground. But if countries are not, for example, changing legislation at the national level, well, let's say that 2.5 billion women and girls are still being discriminated by their national laws. That's not SDGs. That's pure discrimination. So we need to translate those international commitments into national realities. And that goes for legislation, for public policy, or for example, SDGs are about housing, about sustainable food, about a lot of things. But if those goals are not reflected into a country's budget, nothing is going to change. Or if we talk about the Paris Agreement on climate change, well, again, we have common ground. We have a lot of agreements. But if a country is saying, we will see when it comes to establishing their own national goals, well, then you have a problem. So I think that it's about building a bridge. What I loved about working with parliamentarians is that parliaments can be precisely that very important bridge, because we are in charge of all the ratification processes. We are in charge of changing legislation. We are in charge of budget, in charge of oversight. So if we are able to put the 46,000 parliamentarians of the world working in the same direction, I'm sure that we can change the world. Yes, we need the government, we need the judiciaries, we need a civil society, we need businesses. But that's a good way to start, to having people's representatives all around the world working in the same direction. That was my dream at IPU. I think that we did a lot in terms of workshops, in terms of awareness, information, but we need to continue working on that regard.
That's great. Now, when we talk about international, I'm an immigrant in North America, and this is something that I have initially struggled with, and to some extent I struggle with it today as well, which is to understand other cultures. And when you said that, you listen to many different representatives from many different countries, there is somewhat of a limitation that we have, because we cannot be in their shoes. We haven't lived their life, and we haven't gone through what they have gone through. So when we talk about empathy with other cultures, which are very, very different, how do you find that? How do you cultivate that? How do you understand their point of view, even though they may be totally opposite to your point of view, but that's their reality?
Yeah, and they're right. Everyone is entitled to have their own opinion, even if we don't like it at all. But I think that we need to understand our own backgrounds, and sometimes we deny our own roots and backgrounds. Again, allow me to go to my own roots as a Mexican. Mexico has 11.6 million immigrants in the US. and another 25 million Mexican Americans. I mean, Mexicans or Americans from a second or a third generation. My grandfather used to live in California for the last 30 years. So when it comes to talk about migration or refugees, which I think it's also a very sensitive issue, we need to take a look even at our own DNA. We are all a product of migration. There are not pure people in any place. That's
true. That's true. Yeah, that is very true.
So I think that it's about understanding our own DNA. But I find fascinating understanding and knowing other cultures. I was able to travel a lot during the last years, and a lot of people told me in Mexico, you're crazy. You're going to countries where we are not going to understand anything. The alphabet is different, the language, perhaps a lot of people are not speaking Spanish or English. What are you going to do? And I love that experience, feeling perhaps a little bit clueless because I was not able to understand anything. But at the same time, your brain and your senses become like a sponge. And if you're open, if you are really understanding that they have the same right as you to have a different culture, a different religion, they are only praying to a different God. They have sometimes different social values or social traditions. But I think it's about information. It's also about understanding our own backgrounds. Not all countries are having the same history. Not all countries are going to be a strong democracy. And sometimes we can criticize the strong democracies too. So I think it's about understanding. It's about a lot of dialogue, a lot of empathy. But once you are able to understand, then you can build bridges. I mean, you don't have to change your values. You don't have to change the way you think. I am still a very liberal and democratic woman. But I do believe that my job was not to impose any value to anyone. It was how we can reach a good agreement, strong enough to make the world move ahead. And I think we don't have a magic wand saying, tomorrow we are all going to live in a super democratic, super liberal, super respectful of human rights countries or planets. We are going to eradicate climate change and tomorrow everything is going to be green and beautiful. I think it's about sharing and about finding that common ground. And sometimes you have to be super pushy. It's like having an elephant, and sometimes you feel like you're moving or trying to move that elephant on your own. And come on, no one can move an elephant. Well, I'm sure we can. But at the end, if we take care about other people's values and opinions and cultures and backgrounds, I'm sure, and that was my experience 3 years presiding the IPU, if you care, that's something people notice. And that's the way to find that common ground. And then you can write it and vote it, but you need to find it. You need to find where is this consensus.
No, that's great. And one thing I picked up from that that answer was also your curiosity to learn about other people, other cultures. So when you have that curiosity, it automatically drives you, and empathy sort of follows. Because you want to know about them and you want to learn about them, isn't it?
Yes, it's amazing. I think that, well, perhaps because living in a continent which, Mexico is kind of linked to everything. We have North America, we have a cultural identity with Latin America, we have two huge oceans. One we can reach Asia, the other one to Europe. But at the end, everything is also a little bit far. I mean, if you take if you want to go out of Mexico from Mexico City, reaching San Diego, it's going to take 3 hours and a half. If you live in Europe and you take a flight for 3 hours and a half, perhaps you're in a different continent. You crossed a lot of different.
Exactly.
I am very curious about knowing different cultures, different religions. I think that religions are super interesting because at the end is where we deposit our concerns and dreams and expectations, or even the way that we understand life and death. So I am very curious about that part. I am also very curious on how societies evolve. Well, some of them are not really evolving very well, but it's something that I think it brings me a lot of curiosity, because it's a way to understand human nature.
Of course.
And at the end, we are all humans. So why someone is so different to me, I think it's something fascinating.
It is. I agree. Now, another question I want to ask is, because this is very close to my heart, is education. Because for me, education has been transformational in my life. And you started this foundation, which is helping 17,000 students. So how did that come about, and what is your passion for education?
Well, that started 27 years ago. I was also very young, and with some people with my same age. And we were very concerned about how education was becoming not very inclusive, to say the least. No, I think that education cannot be a privilege. It has to be a right that we can all exercise. And I mean, it's also about good quality and access and infrastructure and teachers and a lot of things. So what we did at that moment was a different model of foundation that was not very used in Mexico at the time, which is like we call it here like a second floor foundation. It is not the kind of organization that is working directly with students. We were not teaching anything.
I see.
It was about a foundation with the different mechanisms in terms of funding, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of bringing to this first floor, or working directly with the communities, organizations, but to bring them the tools and the funding that they were needing. So I think that was a very good model. Now this foundation, EDUCA, is working, benefiting about 17,000 students. So that's amazing. And some of the new concerns is about, I am not part of the foundation of the organization anymore, because I started politics a long time ago and with a lot of responsibilities. But they are not now working with environmental education. That's a model of education which can be able or interesting enough to make children committed to fighting climate change and being more responsible about saving the planet. So I find that new initiative also a very interesting one. I hope that we are able to build a new model of education.
That's great.
Being responsible with our communities, with our planet, with each other. A more transcendent education.
That's awesome. Now, one final question. Being female in politics and now in business, we have a lot of female entrepreneurs in the audience. And to be honest, like I notice it as a person of color as well. Women have limited opportunities. They have, as you said, like sometimes they are discriminated and whatnot. So what will you say to them in terms of how can they overcome this adversity? How can they sort of take on the challenge and break through the so-called glass ceiling in politics, in entrepreneurship?
I think that the first part is to never accept or never resign. I don't know the word, but we cannot accept any kind of discrimination. When I started in politics 27 years ago, discrimination against women and girls was part of the daily business. And having harassment was also part of what we had to suffer every single day. The first time that I got elected as a member of parliament, we were only 10% of women part of that legislature. But then, now, 21 years later, after that first time in parliament, now we have gender parity.
Oh, nice.
Now we can talk openly about sexual harassment and to say, hey, this guy is a rapist or something. Now we can speak up. That's something that we were not very open or even able to do 25 years ago. That's a new reality. And I believe that we can use this women's fight inspiration to apply to different kind of discriminations. Yes, there are a lot of discrimination against nationalities, ethnic groups, in terms of age, in terms of gender. There are a lot of different discrimination, but I think that that first part is to don't accept that, to speak up and to fight, because we can win. This has to be a more inclusive planet, and we need to change the rules. The status quo is never going to change itself.
That's right.
We need to be disruptive. We need to be brave. We need to believe in our own power and inspiration. And I think that's possible. I believe that, for example, in terms of parliaments, we still need more women in parliaments. There are only 25.5% of the seats in parliaments are represented by a woman. In terms of youth, that's a tragedy. Half of the total world's population is under 30 years old. But if we translate that age group to parliament, it goes only to 2.6%.
Wow.
76% of the upper houses of the world are not having one single person under 30 years old. Wow. So I think that discrimination is there in many different ways. About the skin color, about age, about gender, about a lot of things. But we have to speak up. We cannot allow these discriminations or whatever kind of discriminatory action to remain in silence. I'm sure that we still have a lot of lessons to learn from the Me Too movement.
Well, that's true. And as you pointed out, I think we are heading in the right direction. So things are improving. And as we continue to make effort, I think we'll get there.
Yeah, I'm sure that we can get there. But
awesome.
But we need to work every day for that. It's not something that will happen suddenly or by goodwill. That requires a lot of work and a lot of solidarity and the strategy and to work for that.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much. This has been a lovely conversation. Thank you so much. I know you're a busy person. Now, before I let you go, if people want to reach out and connect with you, how can they do that?
I think that the easiest way is through my social media. I am in Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, like everything. And there's some also access to my email. But my email is Gabriela Cuevas Barron, which I'm sure that no one is going to be able to try it now. So I think that the easiest way is through social media.
Awesome. Great. I'll put the link in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for this lovely dialogue and the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you.